Hello, this is Karan from San Francisco.
And this is Alex from Los Angeles, and welcome to Movies That Shaped Us, a journey of self-discovery through a shared love of film. We are two longtime friends who grew up on opposite ends of the globe with very different backgrounds, but are both being shaped and have been shaped by the movies that we see and love. Normally in each episode, we cover a topic around important people, places, events, and moments in our lives, and then explore them through three of our favorite films. But as this is still Oscar season, or actually Oscar season just ended, we want to do a bonus episode this week for all you listeners and cover something a little bit different. So Karan, why don't you talk about what we're going to talk about today?
Yeah, we're going to talk obviously about Hollywood's big night. That was the Oscars, the show itself, our reactions on winners, losers, what have you, but then also, use this opportunity to talk about our favorite films of 2021, because we have talked about the movies that shaped our lives, but we haven't really talked about the movies that were released last year and how we think and feel about them.
Mm-hmm.
I also want to remind people that this is a bonus episode. So, we are sort of doing this a little bit on the side, and hence we're changing the thematic relevance and what we typically do. But we'll be back on our regular schedule after this one.
Yeah, a little looser. And then, we're not changing the schedule. Not every Wednesday there'll be a new episode. This is just a special one for the season. So, speaking of Oscars, we're recording this the day after the most recent Oscar ceremony. Maybe Karan, you can start with your kind of, I don't want to say hot take necessarily, but your first thoughts. Like, what did last night sort of mean to you for the 94th Academy Awards? Like, how were they for you?
Yeah. To be honest, and obviously whoever is listening to this podcast, unless you've been living on Mars, at this point what happened, everything that went down between Will Smith and everything that followed. I mean, people have been calling this Oscar the Oscar of the slap, or the slap Oscar. I mean, that's sort of the overwhelming thing. But for me, I would say leading up to that moment, the show just felt really messy, kind of boring, at points also pretty disrespectful. Also, it sort of felt like it was done by somebody who doesn't really understand what the legacy of this award show really is and what it represents, which is frustrating and also disappointing, because the theme was Movie Lovers Unite, which you would think the people who put that theme front and center would really understand and appreciate what that really means, but that didn't come across. What did come across to me was desperate attempts to make the show appeal to casual viewers, and everything that has happened leading up to the main night with the category stuff or the hashtag fan moments or what have you, just none of it landed. And we can get into more of this obviously, but it just felt messy. Even the homage sort of elements or moments that could have landed well because they were honoring some big movies also didn't, and were handled really, really poorly in my mind.
Yeah. So putting the slap aside, I mean, I'll echo your view that it did seem messy. I was not impressed. I think, I'll talk about a couple things I liked. I thought the stage was great, and I actually liked the setup where they had the cocktail tables near the front, much like they did last year with the COVID awards. I thought that landed well. But yeah, some of the choices they made were baffling. I mean, I think the biggest thing for me was the music was just terrible. Like in the beginning, first act, as they called it, this DJ was there. Okay, that's fine. There's no orchestra. Okay. But he would be playing songs that have nothing to do with the presenters, the movies they were talking about. And that's something that I always associate with the Oscars. Oh, so-and-so movie wins the award. You hear that little piece from the score of that, that for better or for worse. Like I still, we were talking about Shakespeare in Love earlier. I still remember the moment when that won and you hear the score. It's like, okay, that's just part of the Oscars, right? There was none of that. Finally, at the end, they brought in the orchestra. The band even, I think, did a terrible job. They brought in the orchestra. Okay, finally, it's kind of getting back to that. But at that point, it's too late. Already lost me. Some baffling choices on the presenters. I thought bringing in those athletes made no sense. When you're talking about James Bond, none of them were British. None of them had anything to do with the franchise. Why are they even there? And then the honoring the films thing, okay, that's cool. Anniversary of Bond, anniversary of Pulp Fiction, even though it was like a weird, like 22 years or whatever. That was kind of weird. But then they have White Men Can't Jump, which, first of all, I've never seen the movie, so maybe it's great. But that didn't win an Oscar. That wasn't nominated for an Oscar. Why are they highlighting this film? That made no sense. Juno, a film that I really don't like, but hey, it did win an Oscar famously for the screenplay. And yet, though you don't have Diablo Cody there, it was just weird. I think you hit the nail on the head. It's like, who was this for? It definitely was not for movie fans, for sure. And I think their, kind of sad attempts at grasping some new audience just did not land at all for me. I was not impressed with the production, for sure. And whoever the producers of the show, especially the music producers, should go nowhere near the Academy Awards again. I mean, I was just screaming at the screen the whole time at how terrible the music choices were. Just just unconscionable. I mean, don't even get me started in the in memoriam section too.
Oh
that
God,
was
so disrespectful.
So disrespectful on every possible level. I mean, I was squirming in my seat at that. Just,
oh my gosh. And doing it in a way like, obviously, Sidney Poitier was an icon and means so much, and his fans all over the world and what have you. But singling him out at the beginning, but then lumping everybody else in this weird celebration. It just again, who is this award for? What are you trying to achieve? I mean, it's really, really sad to me. And then, as if all of that was not horrible or going very well, and then this episode happens, and
with Will Smith, you mean?
And frankly, like I went to bed feeling really, really unsettled. It's sort of honestly how I would feel if I were in a bar somewhere and I'd witnessed a physical, violent kind of altercation between somebody, which in real life also would make me really uncomfortable. But then the fact that this was happening on the largest stage of movies, people like you and me who care about this stuff, I've devoted hours and hours of my life, which probably, I shouldn't be doing, thinking about the awards, the races, watching every movie. It's not about me, obviously, but it felt like a huge insult to the craft of movies, the people who won last night, because everything kind of got tarnished. And so waking up this morning, honestly, I sort of have the feeling as though somebody died. My family or somebody that I know. I've just sort of been in this kind of, speaking of in memoriam, it sort of feels there's been an in memoriam cloud over my head. And I just can't shake it up. And it sort of brings larger questions on, because it's not just about the event of the slap, but the way it was sort of handled, which is basically nothing happened.
Ignored,
zero repercussions, what have you. That sort of brings up many other bigger questions about the climate that we are living in. Hollywood and celebrities over the last several years have been active spokespersons of, what should be quote unquote right, and all of that was just completely kind of rendered meaningless in my mind, because nothing was said. The show just went on. This is the one case where I really think the show shouldn't just go on.
Right.
I'm all for the show must go on, but this is different, and the show could have still gone on with the proper, repercussions or procedures or what have you. So I don't know. I'm sure we'll be discussing this as a culture, for weeks and months and years from here on out. I just read a few hours ago, the Academy is going to, get into investigating what happened. And I hope there's some sort of repercussions or what have you coming out of that. But just even hearing that Will and Jada were at the Oscars after parties and he was dancing with the Oscar, pumping it up and what have you, while people stood and cheered, not everyone probably, but many or some, it just sounds so wrong to me.
Yeah, no, I mean, I echo everything you said just in terms of like that disturbing moment. Like for me, it was also the fact of like who it was. I I've enjoyed Will Smith. Like I watched all his movies as a kid. You know, some of them are bad, some of them are good. I mean, I wasn't like a huge fan. I never watched Fresh Prince, but I do, you know, I always liked him as an actor. He has a very likable and affable personality. And it'd be the one thing if this had happened with an actor or an actress who was sort of known for being like a bad boy or having a problem. But this to me was even more like kind of hard to watch and uncomfortable because he does have this very affable personality that you would never think this would come from him. Yeah. And then yet he does it. Also at a moment in a show where honestly, like personally, when Chris Rock came on, who I am a huge fan of, I'm like, oh my God, these real jokes. This is funny. Like the show's kind of coming back a little bit. Like I was almost all of a sudden I was like happy about like, oh my, this is so funny. And then just to have that moment get so pierced in that way too, again, by someone who, and I had just seen actually that day before the Oscars, King Richard was the last movie I was trying to watch. And I just seen it, thought it was great. I thought he did a great job. I was, wow, this is Will Smith's moment. I'm so excited for him now. Like I was very much in his camp. And then very quickly, I'm like, whoa, like at first I literally thought it was a joke. I even remember we were texting back and forth for a while. Like, okay, that had to have been staged. This isn't real. This is a bit or something. And then once I realized that it wasn't like that, I was just as shooken as you were on this. And like, wow, like just thinking back to, you know, like a Tom Cruise couch jumping moment, which sort of hurt his career, but that was more like, oh, he's so weird and he can't deal with this emotion of love. This was a weird out of character moment, but it was a negative one. It wasn't like Will Smith did something awkward. No, he like assaulted somebody on stage at a public event for no reason whatsoever. And swore at him afterwards. I mean, it just, the whole thing was very hard to watch and unsettling. And yeah, it's unfortunately it does put a cloud over a lot of other moments and wins that I do think were good and did make me happy and were exciting. But yeah, maybe we can try to pivot into that. Like, what were some of the your favorite moments? You know, awards that you were happy to see win from last night. Lift the mood a little bit if we can.
It's so hard to.
I know.
But again, I'm going to mention this as a positive, but then couch it in a huge negative, which is I was so happy that Dune, which we may or may not talk about in a few minutes, really cleaned up a lot of categories. And it was more than just the below the line categories, you know, sound or what have you. It got score, it got editing. Editing was a big sort of up in the air kind of award where, you know, Don't Look Up had won. I'm forgetting now, but yeah, the precursors were a little bit all over the place, and usually editing is closely tied to best picture. So, you know, had this been like a regular ceremony where all these awards had been in the room, by that moment of Dune winning visual effects or editing, I can't remember which is the last one, the momentum of Dune would have been soaring to the point where, you know, we all might have for a second even sort of felt that, oh, is Dune going to win best picture? Is it going to be a huge upset? It kind of reminded me a little bit of when Mad Max was cleaning up all the below the line categories. There's so much momentum and all these amazing, super, you know, brilliant and talented, but weird folks getting up on stage, accepting awards. I can't, like Jenny Bevan won again for Cruella's costume. She had won for Mad Max. So I don't know. It sort of took me back to that moment that this was all, it would have been so special, but of course, you know, that didn't happen that way. That said, I'm very happy that Dune got all these awards because it deserves that. It was beyond just, you know, the typical below the line crafts awards. It was more. So that made me happy.
Yeah, no, I think it deserved to win everything that it did last night. And I feel that they were holding back on the bigger awards because, I mean, this movie, I mean, maybe we'll talk more about Dune, but it's not really a complete film, and they know that there's a second part coming. And I think they were much like they did with the Lord of the Rings franchise. They kind of held back until the end. So they're like, we don't need to really give it a real, you know, picture or director because we know there's a part 2 coming. And if Denny does such a good job, then we'll do it then. So I sort of felt like there was that holdback here with Dune. And it wasn't that it didn't deserve to be like a top nominee or a top potential winner, but that the Academy might have said, we know something else is coming, we'll hold it.
Seemed like it. Which is dumb in my mind.
Oh, it's dumb. I'm not defending it at all. But I'm thinking that's, I think a lot of their mindset, just because we are in this world now where single individual movies really don't exist on their own anymore.
Right.
And I think Dune is actually one of the best examples of that, and just
Yeah.
in terms of how they handle that. But that was my take on why that, because that momentum was there and just didn't obviously carry.
No, but I'm just talking about even the momentum in the show itself.
Right.
The fact that they put all these categories before and then they were being sort of cut in and edited in, and there was no opportunity to really feel the momentum in the room. So yeah, I knew that Dune was never going to be in the best picture lineup in the top 3, but it would have still been a great moment to see all that happen live.
Yeah, no, totally.
Yeah. What about you? What were some wins that you're excited about?
Yeah, I mean, I had just seen Coda a couple days ago, and I did enjoy the film. I thought it was good. I think it was a interesting win. Interesting just in the sense of the movie really wasn't released in the US, and it's on a streaming service. You can't even rent the movie, and yet it ended up winning. That's sort of the state of things, which maybe we'll get into a little bit later too. But I thought it was a sweet movie, really, kind of solid, right down the plate in terms of a baseball analogy, entertaining. And I definitely was very glad to see the Best Supporting Actor win. And that he was just amazing in the film, like just really one of the strong points in that film. So I'm definitely glad to see him get recognized. Obviously a big moment too for the deaf community. So that was great to see. And then the other kind of great moment for me was the West Side Story win for Best Supporting Actress. So that, she just did an incredible job in that film. Definitely the highlight. Fun to see the same character get 2 Oscars, just Oscar trivia. I thought that was kind of fun. And I thought she did a great speech, short and sweet, but hit on the right notes, and just really happy for her. And hopefully she has a long career ahead of her after that. But those are like the highlights for me in terms of the awards.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, I love it when a new actor or actress's kind of coronation happens in this way, especially when it's super deserving and they they did great, and there's all this great sort of symbolic relevance, like you said as well. Like that was super awesome. The last one I would shout out is, even though the movie Eyes of Tammy Faye is like fine, I do think Jessica Chastain's performance is pretty amazing. And I don't know, I'm happy that Jessica Chastain in general has an Oscar, because I think she is brilliant and she's one of my favorite working actresses. She was, in my mind, the whole 0 Dark 30, situation that happened back then sort of robbed her of that moment. I'm totally happy with Jennifer Lawrence having her Oscar too, but if again, it's hard to compare all this. Like this is, all super subjective.
Right.
That said, it's nice that she has an Oscar. She made a great speech, and it's sort of a little bit of a recognition of, here's an actress who's super talented, but also produced a movie, got really behind it, put it all together, ran an amazing campaign that was, grounded, rooted in reality, very kind of personable, at the same time really savvy. Like she really used, this is sort of the good side of all the digital mediums that we have. Like she really used that to her advantage. Like she posted videos of the makeup transformation and her preparation, and in a way sort of opened the door a little bit, or peel back the curtain for folks to see what goes into creating these performances, which again, I wish the Academy Awards would do that, like show us what it takes to create, a great movie and what these crafts are about. But anyway, I'm happy that Jessica Chastain is now an Oscar winner.
Yeah, I did not see the film, so I can't comment on her individual performance in that, but I do agree with everything you said in terms of her skills as an actress. She's an actress I've liked for a very long time. Definitely happy to see her finally get an award. I also felt she was one of the best dressed people. Not that this has turned into a fashion podcast, but I thought her dress was phenomenal and she looked great. Definitely in terms of the award winners, I think one of the better dressed.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, at least she's not in shorts like some other people.
Yes. No. Yeah. That was, or actually wore a shirt, unlike some other people.
Also that.
Yeah. Yep. That was, I think that was also unacceptable and tacky, and not giving the award show the respect it deserves. Just wear a
Yeah.
shirt, dude. Like, just put a shirt on. Come on. What are you doing?
I'm
It's
with you.
insane.
Again, going back to my earlier comment of, is this like an, I don't know, music awards
Right.
or what is this? You
Yeah.
know, and that was sort of scattered not just in the award ceremony. And I actually beg to differ with you on the stage, because to me on the stage also kind of like, I'm thinking of the previous stages, which was so grand. To me, this just felt like, I don't know, the stage of a club where
Interesting.
people
Okay.
like sitting in like right next to it. There's no elevation to the stage, you know, which probably added to the drama. Where, not to, you know, obviously I'm not in a million years would not defend Will's actions, but when somebody is so close to you, kind
That's
of
true.
yelling a joke at you, it probably has a very different impact. Again, not defending what happened thereafter, but yeah.
No, I mean, that's true. If Will had been, not to keep going back to this, but if he had been in a seat like 2 rows in and had to
Yeah.
like go past people and spend the time to then go to the stage, jump on the stage, and then, hit Chris, I just would have taken too long, right? Like, this was so much. He just walked right up, and then did it. Though I will say the thing that I liked, again, I liked the setup, but some great, just Denzel Washington, his posture sitting in those chairs, looking like some like 85-year-old, just like doesn't give a crap grandfather. Just was so cool. That guy, Denzel, is so cool. Just seeing him in his chair, to be like, yeah, whatever. I'm at the Oscars. Yeah, his like feeling of like, this doesn't matter, I thought was cool. Like, that was respectful to me, just because he's Denzel. But he couldn't have pulled that posture off in like a normal theater chair. He was sitting in like a throne. It looked like a king on a throne, where like he could just do whatever he wants because he's Denzel. I thought that was kind of cool. But
That is true. Except though, there are all these reports of him really talking to Will after all this happened.
he did, yeah.
To not sort of take him to task, or sort of make him realize the weight of what had happened, but almost to kind of comfort him, it seemed like, or console him and get him back to reality, to get him ready for the upcoming big win and such. Which, again, we are not in the room. This
Right.
is all based on what has been reported. Who knows? This could all be hearsay, but the fact that Will thanked Denzel in his speech in that moment, sort of, and this is sort of my meta point about the whole thing, right? Like,
Yeah.
these are people that in many ways I've sort of, I won't use the word worship, but really admired for not just what they do as, as craftsmen and women, but also what they stand for. And
Right.
I put Denzel in that category for sure, because he was really the only elder there. Because normally you have Meryl, you have Tom Hanks, you have
Right.
like a whole sort of
Cruise.
first line of people
Mm-hmm.
who are sort of the elder statesmen, women of the Academy, right? Like, this time you only had him. And again, it's sort of a tough spot to be in. I get it. But if somebody could have called it out in that moment, that, okay, we need time out here, it was Denzel. And I wish he had done that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, again, I don't want to get into his head or speculate, but
Right.
yeah, it's tough. Like, you don't really know what the thing was like in the room. But again, too, like with all these people, even Will Smith, I'll quote a film that should have won all the Oscars, Dark Knight. It's either you die here or you live long enough to be, to become the villain. And I think kind of what Denzel was sort of saying too. It's like, when you're at the top, like, that's when your worst side of you comes out. Again, not to defend anything that Will Smith did or anything like that, but maybe it's that just happens sometimes with these stars. You can't really hold them up. I mean, they're just people at the end of the day, so
Absolutely.
you can't really hold them any higher than that.
Good
And they're just
reminder.
actors. They're not even like statesmen or doing something. Other kind of jobs in society. So yeah,
True. Which sort of makes me think, that from now on, just keep it to the movies. I don't want speeches about the world and what's wrong in the world or what have you, which has been so much of the tenor of the last several years. And, I was for it. But today, like after last night, I really questioned that, what, let's just not go there at all, because you guys, at the end of the day, you're just people.
Right.
Might I add, very rich people.
Oh yeah. Hundreds of millions Will Smith is worth. Yeah. Hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yeah.
Well, should any other closing thoughts on the 94th Academy Awards? And I think we've tried to keep it as light as we can.
Yes.
But it's also not the best kind of topic to dwell on. I mean,
No.
maybe the last thing I'll say, just to try to end it on a high note, just another thing that I thought Kevin Costner's portion when he got up there, I thought was just super classy, real movie star talking about actual love of films. I thought that was very touching, and he was almost kind of like tearing up talking about the first major movie he saw back in the day and how the West was won. I thought that those are like the moments why I love movies myself and how they changed me. I thought he was kind of talking about, he was a guest on our podcast, right? Like this is how the movie shaped him, and this was the movie, and he's a real legend, and I'm glad that there was some class there. And to me, I would give Costner that the award for classiest person there last night, and brought almost a tear to my eye as I was watching him talk through that. But
I totally agree. And as as a big speeches lover, especially from the Oscars, like his is the only one that I'm going to go back and rewatch, over time, because it had that kind of impact.
Yeah. Well, speaking of impact, and just maybe to like zoom out a little bit, like you've been talking about, Oscars overall and the state of things. I know in the previous episode, I definitely had a lot of things to say. I went off on my little rant about, where the industry's going. I just curious. And yeah, maybe after last night, if you have any other thoughts on like where the Oscars are going, what does the future hold for the awards?
Yeah, I think, and thank you. I think you said it really brilliantly last time to me, which is that the awards are, as good as or not as good as what is being made in Hollywood, right? So I think that is kind of the bigger part of the conversation. Of course, there will always be a lot of nuance and specifications to the awards themselves with, who's in the voting body, what are the political kind of waves that are running, everything from streaming versus theatrical to what issues do you want to support, who is running the best campaign. All of that will always be sprinkled. And also the length of the season itself. Like we've seen multiple narratives in this last award season kind of rise, peak, fall, and new ones to get minted. If this was a much shorter season, had the Academy Awards been in, I don't know, late February or even early February, Power of the Dog would be winning. There's no question in my mind, right?
Yeah.
So putting all that aside, and we can come back to that part. I think just thinking about the state of the industry and the movies that are being made, I'm thinking a lot about what you said, and I think the point you made about kind of Harvey Weinstein, not to evoke him again, kind of did what he did with his campaigning and kind of created this new lane, if you will, for sort of prestige, drama pictures that then kind of became the new kind of Oscar darling, if you will. I think that's, obviously, first of all, not great at all. And totally agree that has had a huge impact in terms of what gets made. But I think there's a lot to unpack there in terms of the impact that has had by itself, but also the general tiering of movies that are being made. So to me, like if you look at the pre-Weinstein era, you always had kind of one odd, kind of smaller budget sort of indie movie. And then you had, a bunch of sort of kind of middle budget adult dramas. And then you had these rare crop of blockbuster movies that were, hundreds of millions of dollars, were entertaining, big blockbuster movies, but also had something to say. I put the Titanics and such of the world in that. But those movies are, first of all, rare to begin with. Like, how do you make a blockbuster movie that is entertaining, makes $1 bajillion, but also is a feat, in terms of what it took to make it. But on top of it also has something to say, if you will. Like, it can't just be like, Independence Day could be would we ever consider Independence Day to be an Oscar movie? Probably not.
No. Yeah.
So it has to, sort of show that to some degree. So To me, I think as time has gone by, yes, the Harvey stuff has had some impact, but I think to me that bigger impact was really on the middle budget adult drama, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
not sort of the big blockbuster lane, because that was always separate in my mind. And if you look at that lane itself, it's superhero movies that have taken that lane,
Nowadays,
you
yeah.
know,
Mm-hmm.
now.
Mm-hmm.
And because I was looking this at, many years back, just looking at what was nominated over the last, several years. And if you think about it, the big budget movies were always IP based in some way or the other, for the most part. Um, and the same is true for your mid budget adult dramas as well. Like you were talking about Hitchcock, we were
Mm-hmm.
talking about, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, or All About Eve. Like these are sort of mid budget adult dramas. These are all based on either famous plays or famous books
Right.
at that time, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think those have, I don't think Harvey's stuff really broke that. Because if you look at the years from when Shakespeare in Love won to until I will say the last 4 or 5 years, we've had a constant crop of adult dramas, but they've been diminishing.
Right.
And to me, I think
Right.
the diminishment is not so much because of the Harvey lane, but more
Mm-hmm.
about just the top big blockbuster lane becoming wider
Mm-hmm.
with superhero movies coming in, where your return on investment is so assured, and you're basing it off of IP that already exists. So why wouldn't you do that? In fact, that's sort of become the success definition for even directors. You make an indie movie, and the next thing you're offered is a big superhero movie, versus way back when Sundance people and such would graduate to make the next big sort of mid-budget
Mm-hmm.
adult movie, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which would then be at the Oscar stage at some point because it had something to say, it was meaningful, and what have you. So those people aren't doing that. Even, I mean, yeah, Chloe Zhao, what have you. It's such an interesting phenomenon,
Well, yeah.
which, whole other conversation.
Yeah.
So there's that as number one factor. The other thing I think is the impact of streaming, which number one is sort of access, but I'm sure there'll be studies done on this over time, or maybe they already exist, which is, I think what streaming has done a little bit is it created this need for, I want to watch when I want it and I want it immediately.
Mm-hmm.
But on the heels of that, what comes, I think, is a little bit of a passive viewing mentality. It takes a lot to engage with in people's minds, obviously not for you and I, but I talk to so many people, and this is not just in the last 2 years because of the COVID, but even before that, it took a lot for people to go and engage with a 2 hour long movie that
Mm-hmm.
dealt with something serious and meaningful. Why? But then I would say, what are you watching on TV? They were watching intense dramas.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that you can watch it at your own pace. You can be sort of passive, check in when you want to check in, and sort of say, yeah, I watched this. So it's sort of interesting how the ease of access and a little bit of the casual passiveness of the medium has really impacted what gets made ultimately. I was listening to a rewatchable podcast where they covered Kramer versus Kramer. I was shocked. Kramer versus Kramer was the number one box office movie of that year.
A huge hit. Yeah.
Shocking to me, But anyway, all this to say, the Weinstein thing is definitely a part of it. I think there are many other forces that are playing in terms of what gets made, and all these different layers are kind of superimposed over each other. And again, we are not film historians. The ideal way to do this would be to literally look at Best Picture winners over the last, 40 years. And I almost considered doing that, making a giant Excel sheet and start to, compare budgets and the genre of movies and types and how that has changed over the last 40 years. Maybe at some point you and I will get to do that. But these are my kind of just reactions to what we were talking about last time.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think you're correct in it. It's because we're talking about the movies getting made being like the input into then what the Academy does. there are a lot of factors that are at play for sure. I think you're hitting on a lot of those about blockbuster filmmaking becoming more and more prevalent because studios want to take less and less risk. Well, that's because of market consolidation. There's fewer studios now than there were even 20 years ago, right? And they want to, the movies are also getting a lot more expensive. You make a Marvel movie, it's $250-300 million. That's how much money it costs to do these things. You want to make sure there's a almost guaranteed return on your investment too. And yes, there also, critically acclaimed movies does not always equal box office success at all. I mean, usually the highest films of the year were not the number one film at the Oscars, right? Like there's usually are not, the Kramer vs. Kramers, the Titanics, those have always been aberrations. I think, the thing that I'm concerned about, I guess, when it comes to the Oscars and what they mean, kind of like what we were touching on in the last episode, where, to me, I think should be a good barometer of, I go back and I watch movies. Those are good movies, first of all, that still hold up. And then secondarily, they reflect a little bit of that, of the time. And I just feel in the last 15 years, just the quality of the standing the test of time thing, I just think has gone down as these films have just become more and more niche. But to your point, I think that's not just because Harvey Weinstein used the Oscars to make money and decided, I can fund these smaller movies, but get a huge return on investment because if they win the Oscars, a big Oscar bump, which actually, funnily enough, I was reading an article, I can't remember where this was in the last week, that whole idea that Harvey built his entire, career on when it came to the Oscars of the Oscar bump is now no longer the case. Before the movie wins the Oscar, you make an extra 20-30 million, and on a movie that costs 15, that's a lot of money. Sometimes you double your gross. Now, Shape of Water wins Best Picture. It makes an extra $2 million afterwards. There is not that giant Oscar bump because these movies just are even nicher than the things that Harvey was chasing. I mean, again, Shakespeare in Love, I think, does hold up really well, is actually a very good movie that is still very enjoyable to this day. But it's what he started with that movie or crystallized with that movie and that campaign. Just the rest of the industry, I think, took the wrong lessons from it. And now the Oscar bump doesn't exist anymore. Hell, Coda, right, that just won last night, has not even in a theater. It's grossing $1 million globally. And Apple's, I don't know if they're ever planning on putting it in theaters at all. This wasn't to them about any kind of return on investment from that film. It's more about their brand. And maybe this will get more people onto their streaming service. So even then, that film becomes not as important of succeeding or failing on its own, but part of some giant, content offering from a streaming service is trying to get your $8.99 a month. Right. It's just the whole economics of the industry are changing too. So I definitely agree with you that there's a lot of factors at play here, a lot of macro factors on the entire industry, and the Oscars are just a reflection of what's going on. And I think, in a way, actually, the Oscars, because they are fading from relevance. I mean, last night, I think it was 15 million viewers, second lowest Oscar viewership of all time. Last year had 9. That was much worse. But 9 years ago, it was 40 million people. Right. That's less than half of the viewership. I think that is actually a bellwether for Hollywood in general. Anything outside of the Marvel films or any of these big IPs, what is going to happen? Maybe they'll all shift to streaming, and that's okay. As long as the artists still get to put this content out there and create their art and people see it, I think that's fine. Then the rest of this stuff just becomes, back in my day, it wasn't like this kind of complaining, which I don't want to be that guy. It does worry me a little bit that in 30 years when they do an anniversary of an Oscar, last night, right? Oh, White Men Can't Jump. I mean, okay, again, wasn't an Oscar winner, but I've heard of the film and it still exists in some facet in the zeitgeist because they put it on the freaking Oscars. 20 years from now, what are they going to be going and thinking back on? What came out in the last couple of years that really is going to stand the test of time? I just don't know. And that's what worries me. Other than saying, Avengers Endgame came out, which, that will stand the test of time. And maybe that'll be what the Oscars turns into, but I don't personally want that, even though I did love that film. And would love to see a reunion of that in 20 years on the Oscar stage, but that just worries me.
No, for sure. I mean, I will say though, first of all, a movie is memorable and holds the test of time, small or big. That has nothing to do with the size of the
for sure. It just got to be good enough. Yes, correct. And capture the zeitgeist. That is true.
So in fact, I think we were saying this maybe off mic or even during last time we talked about this, like a lot of the Harvey movies actually are really good.
Oh, fantastic.
They're
Yeah.
also are some of them are horrible,
Right.
but a lot of them are also very good. So
Yeah.
I think that argument gets a little bit conflated.
Mhm.
That's why what I was waking up every day thinking about, because we were sort of putting Harvey movies, Titanic, and Hitchcock movies all in the same breath, and that just completely tripped my mind
Mhm.
because they're totally different things.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, versus if you're just talking about what is good, there's a lot of good that's been made over the last 10 years. Now, whether has it won or no, that's a different thing. And this is where
Yeah.
I think the various political machinations, which is no longer the Harvey model, but there are other models at play, which are coronating what wins. And sometimes it sort of makes sense, like Parasite, which is that rare anomaly which hits all the boxes. But then in other cases like Shape of Water or Hal Green Book,
Argo, 12 Years a Slave,
doing the same.
Birdman, anything from the last decade, I literally feel like you could throw in that category as being forgotten a couple years later. But sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah, no, I think it's true more for the winners, but I think that is more to do with other forces than what is being made. I was sort of looking more at just what was nominated. And honestly, if you even look at this last year's slate, or this year's slate, I should say, what was nominated last night, this is a great slate, right? You have a musical made by one of Hollywood's, granddaddies, Spielberg, which is incredibly made.
Fantastic film.
Yep. You have Dune, which is a blockbuster movie, done really well, crafted beautifully, but also has something to say, feels relevant in many ways, so hard to pull off. Then you have something like Nightmare Alley. I found it boring, as you know, but again, brilliantly crafted, has stars. You are going to watch it. I know this is on you love this movie. So,
yes, we talked about it already. Yeah.
People are going to watch this over time. And then you have smaller indie-ish stuff. I mean, it's hard to divorce Apple from Coda, but I have to remind myself that this movie was made for nothing and premiered at Sundance. It's just that Apple picked it up.
Right.
Like Apple didn't make this movie.
Correct.
Right? So,
it was an acquisition.
Yeah, it's an indie darling. You look at Power of the Dog, again, a little bit boring to me, but I don't like Westerns anyway. So you have a Western, which again is sort of contemporary and saying interesting things, is beautifully crafted. So it's actually a really diverse. And then you have Drive My Car, a foreign movie, 3 hours long, brilliantly made. What a feat! What an achievement! So to me, this is probably one of the most diverse slates we've ever had of movies. We're obviously too close to it, but I can't wait to, like, Licorice Pizza is one of my favorites. Maybe we're getting ahead of ourselves, but there's a lot of good here, which I think will hold the test of time. Whether Coda would or not, that's a different story.
Yeah, I mean, I think actually, as I look back at the nominees, to your point, this year and just comparing it, I mean, it's last year, I think, was one of the weakest years in Oscar history. But I even looking back over the last 10 years, I do think it was a strong year. Looking at the nominees, just comparing it to the nominees from some of these other years that happened in the last decade. And yeah, this is a lot of these films I do think will hold up regardless of whether they were nominated or not. Like if they hadn't been nominated, I think they still would be remembered, which is really like the test, right? It's like, it's not because they were nominated, they're remembered. It's almost like, a One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, they're all about Eve. These are classics who then also happen to be Oscar winners.
Exactly.
Right. And I think that's where in the last 10 years, if the artist is not a classic, but it's an Oscar winner. So they'll talk about it in some context, but it'll never be talked about beyond the discussion of Best Picture winners.
No.
Versus All About Eve and Cuckoo's Nest will be talked about, even if they never won an Oscar, those movies would still be around and still be talked about because they are stone cold classics. And the Oscar just like, oh, cool. Yeah, of course they won an Oscar. They're great. Right. So I think it's like, what context are you discussing these films in? And my worry is that the more time passes, the more it'll just be, oh, it just won Best Picture. That's how we're talking about it. And the year in film will be more discussed around the Marvel movie that came out or something else that was going on in the zeitgeist that was not the film that year. But yeah, maybe this year is I do actually not maybe this year definitely is a pretty strong year when it came to these nominees. I mean, I saw almost all of them. A couple I didn't see of the nominated films, but I didn't think there was like a stinker in the bunch as compared to previous years. It's usually one or two. They're like, wow, how the hell did this thing get in? This is just like no good.
And I think you get those years, which is why I think I kind of look at what the nominated slate as opposed to winners, because there's so much more at play with what wins. I mean, again, we've not done a statistical deep enough study, but I'm sure in the 60s and 70s as well, there's probably one flew over the cuckoo's nest, but that's probably not the case every single year of what won. There's probably, I don't know. We'll have to look.
I'm scanning that now, and yeah, I think I'm not sure if that's necessarily true. There are some decades that are weaker than others. I'll definitely grant you that. Right. And yeah, not Tom Jones. I'm just scanning the ones from the '60s. Tom Jones. Never seen that. But you got My Fair Lady, Sound of Music, In the Heat of the Night, Midnight Cowboy, Lawrence of Arabia, The Apartment. So that was a good decade. But I definitely grant you your point that not all of them stand up. For every Lawrence of Arabia, there's Around the World in 80 Days.
Exactly.
Like, who's seen that?
I mean, there's a time when Hollywood was just stuck in these bloated musicals that were just bad.
Greatest Show on Earth. Another one that's not that good. Yeah.
But if you remember what was happening on the sidelines were Marty and all these people were coming up. That was sort of the new bracket of indie movie directors. Right. And to your point and what I was saying earlier too, I think what scares me the most is that whoever is a great indie voice, their success now seems to be go and make a superhero movie. And they're not allowed to make the next, it doesn't have to be a big blockbuster movie, whatever the next thing is after your 2-cent movie that you can go and make. There are very few people who are allowed to do that. There's some anomalies for sure. Damien Chazelle, Barry Jenkins. I think we've had few people, Greta Gerwig, few people from the last 10 years Jordan Peele, who are going to go and do great things. And they've carved a little bit of a lane for themselves that they didn't go and make a superhero movie. But you're right. I think that bracket is smaller because, like you said, again, the movie economics have changed. The most straight short economic definition is go make a superhero movie and you are going to get your return on investment. And I wish, or go make TV. That's sort of what it seems to be,
Yeah. And I mean, that has existed for a while too. The whole like one for me, one for you kind of dichotomy, a lot of directors have played in that space, but they kind of make a name for themselves first. And then they get into that. I'll make the big studio picture, but then I want to make my passion project, and they kind of go back and forth. And I do feel like nowadays that you make an indie movie, might not even really be that good. And maybe you needed a couple more movies to kind of become the artist you're supposed to be, but you get plucked from that and thrown into the machine. And then at that point you just get destroyed, or all your creativity you lose the potential career you could have had. Like you couldn't have had the career. But that's again, the nature of the industry, unfortunately. And maybe TV is just a safer place for those people to go, or streaming.
Potentially. Yeah. And again, there are very few Martin Scorsese's even back then,
Oh, for sure.
Most people who made an indie movie that was sort of good, they then were given more money to go make something a little bit more blockbustery, was probably middling,
Right.
Versus now, those people are making these giant superhero movies. They're just more visible. They're also middling. And that's it. But then you still, I'm not comparing Scorsese with the names that I rattled off, the good ones.
Right.
But I see potential, as somebody who came to Hollywood movies a little bit late in life, I'm so excited to witness Greta Gerwig's career. It's almost like witnessing Woody Allen or Scorsese and that sort of trio of New York people coming to life. So we have those.
Yeah.
I just hope that, they get to keep making what they're meant to. So, yeah.
Well, in terms of then, we talked a lot about good and bad movies and the Oscars. Why don't we go into then our personal favorites from last year? So like you said at the beginning of the episode, Karan, we've already done an episode on the movies that shaped our 2021. But this is just a simple best of list. Like if you were in the Academy, what would what were your 3 best pictures of last year? So do you wanna start with one of yours?
Sure. So my number 3 is Dune. I think we already talked about this on our podcast, on one of the other episodes.
The movie theater experiences.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yep.
So I don't need to go into too much detail, but yeah, all I would say is that to me, this is sort of the version of that big blockbuster movie that you, Alex, often talk about, which is beautifully crafted, but has something to say. I put it in the same bracket as Titanic and Avatar are sort of like a whole other level in a way, but I still put Dune in that bracket, movies, and especially in today's times with everything that we've been saying, like making a movie like this in the superhero fandom world seems impossible. And I watched this movie having known very little about the book, never watched the movie. I'm not even a big science fiction person, but watching a movie in sort of a pandemic-y time in a house full and absolutely being, leaned forward in my chair throughout the entire length of the movie, grasping its complications and the world, marveling at sort of the crafts, but also being sucked in the story and the characters, and also feeling relevance to our present day times. Like, it's a huge achievement. It's sort of like Titanic meets Lawrence of Arabia. If these movies were to be made today, this is what it would look like. So yeah, I can't believe that a movie like this is even on my list, because I'm more of a small movie person, but I just admire it, but also love it. And I can't wait to watch it again.
Yeah, I liked, as we talked about before, I like this film as well. As been someone who's not really a Denis Villeneuve fan,
Right.
never really connected with any of his films. I thought this was the one that I connected with the most, due to, I think, a lot of the themes that Frank Herbert sewed into Dune just hit home a lot to me. And just from a craft perspective, much like at the Oscars last night, it won all those craft awards. Just amazing, from sound design to music to production design, the look of the world. It looked alien. He did a great job of transporting us as an alien world. I thought the most interesting thing about the movie, though, is it wasn't really a movie. It was like a part 1 of 2, and even more so than like the Lord of the Rings movies in a way.
Right.
I just think that is interesting, that it's almost like the streaming paradigm is bleeding now into film, much the way like the Marvel movies are all kind of episodes of the same show continuing on. This was just another example of that. And in a way, it gave me hope of like, yeah, you can still allow the streaming narratives of a continually long, like 8-hour story work in a theater. James Cameron's even talking about this with the latest Avatar. He's like, yeah, maybe I can see a world where there's a 3-hour cut you see in a theater, you go home, you watch a 4-hour cut, and then the super fans can watch a 5-hour cut of all the same movie. And I want to make them all. And I'm like, whoa, like, that sounds crazy, but at the same time, like, that is kind of what Villeneuve's already been doing with Dune. It's like, this is something that is not just a 2-hour movie that you can sit there and leave and walk away and get the whole story. You got to see that part 2. And I definitely, after it was over, was like, I want to see this part 2. And yeah, I'm glad that they're making it. And kind of like what I was saying earlier, hopefully the Academy remembers part 1 when part 2 comes around. And if he does just as good of a job, that it can get some actual, bigger awards. I did like this film too.
Cool. What was your number 3?
My number 3 is also another film that we've talked about on this podcast before, Nightmare Alley. This was the movies that shaped life experience episode. And this was a movie that I saw in the theaters, Del Toro, and, talked about it already, but I just think it's a fantastic film noir that deals a lot of very important themes about knowing thyself, and in a way that is very interesting, with fantastic acting from Bradley Cooper, very understated performance. I do think he should have got some recognition from the Academy on that. Kate Blanchett, who's always usually fantastic, just amazing, doing an amazing job in the film. So yeah, again, we've talked about this a lot already. So I don't think there's a lot more I can say other than that I just really enjoyed this film a lot. I was surprised actually how much I took to it. I'm a big Del Toro fan, but I felt this was a lot more understated than his normal stuff. Definitely one of, I think maybe Blade 2 is my only film of his that I think was better.
Oh wow.
And huge fan of his, and this just was, I was blown away by it.
That's big praise. Yeah, I think like I said, I feel like I love Del Toro more as a human being, because he just seems such a
Cool guy. Yeah.
cool guy and knows so much, so gracious, and always just seems to kind of have the pulse of, I don't know, people, media, what matters and such. But movies I'm sort of mixed on.
Mm-hmm.
I agree it's more understated than his other movies, but to me this still felt very stated.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, maybe if this movie is like chopped by, I don't know, 30 minutes or something, perhaps this movie lands on me in a totally different way. That said, I can't wait. I wouldn't say that actually. I am excited to watch it again. And maybe it lands on me differently. And to add to the performances, undeniable on the craft side. Like this movie is just looks and feels beautiful. And again, I know we've been complaining about they don't make him like this. Here you go.
Right.
This is that kind of movie.
Yeah.
It's sort of in that range of adult dramas that are mounted like an actual picture, and also has something to say. So yeah, they make him.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, they do. Cool. So what's your number 2 favorite film of last year?
Yeah. So my number 2 is Licorice Pizza, which, has gotten into a lot of hot water, and obviously, who am I to say to anybody like feel this way about a movie? So everyone's feelings are totally justified, because they're honest to how they feel. But to me, we've talked a lot about PTA, which is again a surprise to me because I don't consider myself as a PTA head.
Hey, you keep bringing them up all the time, though.
I know.
I think you are secretly. I think you are.
Maybe I just have an issue with the definition of the word head of somebody.
Yeah, like a big fan. Yeah.
Yeah, because that sort of signals that you'll blindly like anything that they make, and you'll go on rants about them on various forums. That is not
okay.
who I will ever be.
Right.
But I do look at every picture on its own merit, and it just so happens that what he's made has resonated with me. Not everything, but a lot of it. And I just think the register that he's working in now, which is lighter, a lot more fun and funny and kind of homage to his own childhood, but still bringing, all of his finesses and brilliance of character work and the way movies are shot and the way relationships are explored, albeit complicated and weird. I just think, again, we've said so much in this episode, they don't make it like this, but this is, to me, that sort of classic, not super high budget, kind of that mid-budget adult drama, which is really, really well crafted, the great mise-en-scène in every single way. And yeah, just a director, working at the top of his game in a way, who's eased into who he is and eased into his weirdness, if you will, without trying to sort of, show and sort of yank everybody away in saying, oh, look how good I am, aka Magnolia. This is not that. It's not an angry, showy picture. It's a lot more subtle, but it doesn't mean it's ordinary and has nothing to say. It actually has a lot to say. And in fact, I'll just say this, that the way I made my list was one of the movies that I want to go and watch again and I can't wait. So this is pretty much in that order. So this is, I've only seen it once and I can't wait to watch it again.
Yeah, I like this movie a lot. I respect PTA as an artist more than I love him as a filmmaker. But this, I think, was one of my favorite films that I've seen of his. Like the tone of it was just so light. It was very funny. Definitely a good change of pace from The Master and Phantom Thread, which were very like serious dramas. And this was very lighthearted. Fantastic performances from Elena Heim. I think she was also robbed on a nomination, frankly. And just dealt with a lot of really like great coming of age story, great sort of reflection on what love means. And yes, it was through these very young characters, but in the way that both of them were acting with each other, I thought the little vignettes of each of the relationships she was trying to go into to kind of get back at him showed all the different facets of what love is and how it can be reflected in all these different ways in terms of what you want out of your partner. And in the end, you sort of realize that it's kind of a amalgamation of all those different things. And that's why, maybe they end up together in the end. It's kind of left vague. I just also thought it was a movie that really was transportive back to what it must have felt like. And I maybe I shouldn't say because I don't know, but transportive back to the San Fernando Valley in the 1970s. And just amazing. Just the look of this film. So this was also shot in 70 mil. I think in the previous episode where we talked about The Master, I said I don't understand why that was in 70 mil, and I was disappointed. This one I saw in 70 mil in a theater, and I was like, wow, like I get why he did this it just gave it this epic sense of grandeur and scale and detail that was just so transportive. I mean, it was a fantastic film. I'm glad it got a little bit of recognition at the Academy. But one of my favorite films last year too, for sure. I really liked it.
Yeah, I'm so happy you loved it. Again, we talk a lot about the sort of the politics of sort of what wins and what, is considered up there. Like, you talk about a movie like this by a director of this stature who's been this sort of singular voice and is now settling into his sort of, older age, and everyone respects him, what have you. A few years ago, 10 years ago, this movie will be at the top of everybody's list in terms of, what wins Best Picture. Alana Haim not only gets a nomination, but probably gets, I hate to say it, but the Ingenue Best Actress award. He gets it, But again, we are in such a different time. Not saying what's good or bad, it's just different of, how, because of the controversies and such attached to this movie, it just sort of became a decided thing. You know what? We're not even going to deal with this. We're going to recognize PTA because we love him. So the only nominations for the entire movie are his. 3.
Right.
He's the director, writer. That's it.
Yeah.
And that's, so it's interesting how that's changed.
Yeah. No, totally. And I mean, I think eventually he'll get back in the good graces enough of the Academy, hopefully. But I totally agree with you. I think maybe only 10 years ago, this movie would have been like the front runner and the one to beat for the rest of the folks that were nominated. But just a great movie. Will live on because it's part of his filmography, and he's one of the true great filmmakers we have. Yep.
All right. What's your next?
My number 2 is Don't Look Up, which is the Adam McKay film for Netflix. I guess you could call it a satire / allegory about global warming and climate change, though I definitely read it as more of a general statement on the world and society today. Yes, America specifically, but I think you also could zoom out a little bit and just say this is an encapsulation of the world. I mean, I think this is a film that if aliens came down now, or there was a civilization 1,000 years in the future and we're like, hey, what was it like in 2021? I'd be like, just watch this movie and you'll understand everything about what, 21st century planet Earth was like. I know it was, controversial. Like some people liked it, some people hated it. I just was blown away by what Adam McKay was able to pull off. I thought it was just, he was walking that fine line through the entire film. And I just don't think he ever fell off of it. I was blown away by what he did, mainly the directing and the writing, but also the performances I thought were great. DiCaprio, just one of his better performances, very against character, which I thought was interesting. And Jennifer Lawrence, who for me is either kind of hit or miss, I thought just did a great job. And just saying a lot of important things too. I mean, honestly, like the movie was almost made for me in terms of political worldview. Definitely very anti-capitalist, very definitely anti, big tech. So it was, I have to admit I'm a sucker for those things. So, and if you can't swallow that stuff well, I could see why this movie was controversial. But and it was funny, honestly. Like I laughed my way through it, which is something that's important to me when you're trying to deal with serious topics. So that was definitely a great film. I'm glad it got some recognition. I was honestly surprised that it got any nominations just because it was so controversial at the Academy, even though McKay has had a pretty good track record with the last couple films of being recognized as a serious filmmaker. And I thought there was a chance it could have won Best Screenplay, but it didn't. But I thought it had a good shot.
He won the WGA.
Yeah, no, I thought there was a chance.
This might happen.
Yeah, there was a chance.
Yeah, I'm not in sort of the camp of people who like hate this movie for sure, but I'm also not in your camp who kind
Yeah.
of adore it the way you do. I come more in the middle. Um, Also, part of it is like in general, I'm not a big satire person.
Okay.
Like, it's hard for me to divorce the seriousness of what is happening. So I can't laugh at it. Maybe I laugh at it, when I watch it again because I've digested what this is about.
Right.
In
Yeah.
the moment, it's sort of like a car crash, that's happening.
Oh yeah.
And I'm
Yeah.
like, how is this funny? Just the way I don't find drunk people funny.
You
Some people find
don't.
it
Oh.
hilarious. Same thing.
Okay.
Sometimes I would, but for the
Yeah.
most part, I'm always like, ooh, when is this person going to hit their head or like yell at somebody or slap somebody? Haha.
Oh. Yeah.
So that makes me very unsettled, I guess. But so yeah, but that said, though, was I entertained and gripped? Absolutely. Was I bored? Not at all. I was totally invested in this movie from opening frame till the last scene. I think everybody in it is amazing, pretty much. It's brilliant casting across the board. It's sharply written, beautifully edited, I should say, of how it's sort of pieced together is amazing. I also think if the discourse around this movie and the promotion around this movie was less about climate change and such, and more about what you are saying of sort of the inability to act on anything by people, this movie actually lands even stronger. And I'm obviously all for climate change and everything, but I almost feel like in a different time where the media surrounding us was not as loud and was not kind of feeding us this, oh, this is the message of the movie, it's very important, and if you don't like this movie, blah blah blah, that means you're whatever.
Yeah.
Not that I believe in any of it, but it's hard to ignore that.
For sure.
To me, this is a much stronger movie about just our inability to act, come to consensus about things that matter, and how distracted we are. And frankly, you also need those distractions. Like, I like the humanity in these people that comes across in bits and pieces that, yeah, if somebody is about to, I don't know, I hate saying it, like really ill in my family or what have you, am I just going to be sitting there crying all day? No, I will watch something funny. I will watch something stupid to just disengage. It's just human nature. So I think it does that really well. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree with you in the sense of, I think people got too hung up on the climate change aspect of it, which I think, again, I saw it more of an allegory for anything in this country, especially big problems that we know the solutions on, how to make a better healthcare system, how to solve inequality. Like, these are not solutions that aren't out there. It's just we have an inability to act on it. And I think that's what this movie, used that climate change and then the asteroid is an example for doing that. But that's why, again, I feel like it'll stand the test of time, even after hopefully we've solved the climate change crisis. This movie then doesn't become irrelevant. I think it is still has a lot of things it can just say about how government works, how corporations work with government, the whole thing. But yeah,
I totally agree. Okay,
your number one.
Yeah. So my number one is a movie called Worst Person in the World. It's a Norwegian film. I had not seen anything directed by this director, but I'm aware of Joachim Trier and the Oslo movie that he made a few years ago, which I now need to go back and check it out. But I don't know, like this movie sort of blew me away. And like what you were saying, that none of these movies from the last 10 years sort of really stand the test of time. And I disagree to a degree on that. I think this is a movie that when I left the theater, I was smiles ear to ear, not only because how much I love the movie, but more about just, this is why I love movies. This is how, a director, a writer can put together a cast and say something so interesting about human relationships and where we are as people. And there's so many themes around coming of age, being indecisive, being a millennial, cancel culture, not knowing what is right, what is wrong, how the world reacts to you in all the ways. I just thought it was so brilliant, funny, brilliantly acted. Like, talk about being robbed. Like, to me, the best performance of the year, at least from in the actress category, is Renata Reinsve. I mean, it sort of takes me back to, you know, it's an interesting comparison because these movies are very different, but I sort of feel like if Annie Hall, the queen of rom-coms, were to be made today, and if this genre didn't even exist, this is what it would look like. And maybe that's why this movie cheered me so much, because it gave me hope that, oh, young directors or whoever who want to sort of make the next, I don't know, 20 years of whatever this genre is, kind of rom-com-esque. This, I hope they take a page from this book, you know? So I don't know. I'm sure we'll talk about this movie in some other podcast of ours where we really get into it. But yeah, this is my number one.
Yeah, I like this movie a lot. I thought I would, again, just because I'm not an Annie Hall fan, it reminded me more of like an Amelie, actually, than an Annie Hall. But no, I thought it was performance was great, visually interesting. The story, and especially the main character, like it just did. It was interesting throughout the whole thing, and deals with a lot of stuff that you were talking about too, of just not knowing what you're doing in life, and kind of just not struggling necessarily, just wandering in a way through decisions. And even at the end, I don't necessarily feel like she's found any sort of security or solace, or really even any answers. Just all these questions have been asked by her to herself or of her from other relationships she's had, and she just continues to kind of exist and go down this path, which I thought was just an interesting way also to kind of end the film. It wasn't like she found her person or decided to, you know, mature or grow up, and no, she's still flitting from job to job and from relationship to relationship, but she seems happy, which is what matters, right? It's just something that this sort of captures that point in your life where you don't necessarily really need to be doing that yet. As long as you're happy, it's like, and live through those experiences. It doesn't have to be a checklist of things you have to get to or things you have to do. But I thought it was great.
I'm happy to hear that. Yeah, it's sort of the predicament of our, I mean, we are sort of late millennials, but this is the predicament of our generation to a degree, but definitely the generation that came ahead of us.
Yeah.
And I think it captures that in a very light, sweet way, because there's a lot to be, I don't know, either really corny about this or also be really annoying about this, because a lot of this is pretty annoying, or can be. Right. And it's, to me, the feat of the movie is that it presents this lead character in a sympathetic way. And even not, that doesn't mean you agree with them or root for them always, but you are engaged, which I just think is just so difficult, because both of us seem like this movie. We could have hated her from, I don't know, frame 2, and just, I would have been like, okay, I'm not interested in wherever you go. Right. That doesn't happen.
Yeah, no, it's great. It might not be a film that a lot of the listeners have heard about yet, but I definitely recommend folks checking it out for sure. I thought there was not that it had much of a chance at the Oscars last night with international film, but I was like, oh, maybe it could do an upset over Drive My Car. But
yeah, this was the closest.
Yeah.
What about you?
So my number one film last year, which actually ties into the Oscar ceremony last night, is The Last Duel, which there was a joke that Regina Hall made at this film's expense that made me so mad. And again, I don't want to bring back the Oscars, so I won't get into that too much. But no, I thought this was just a phenomenal film. Ridley Scott, you know, I don't want to say biased, but I was working my way through last year of watching all the Ridley Scott films. So I really got to fall in love with him even more as a director and understand his take on the world and respect him a lot more than I ever have. So I was primed, I guess, primed to pump a little bit on this one, but I was just blown away by this film. I think it deals with a lot of very important issues around, just subjectivity and understanding your own point of view being different from other people's point of view, dynamics of power between all the different characters, patriarchy as well, just how women's place back in medieval times, comparing that to today. And just incredibly well crafted. I think the script by Ben Affleck and Matt Damon, just phenomenal. They were both incredible in the film. All the acting across the board, I think, was, should have been recognized, especially Jodie Comer, who was the female lead of this film. I think just did an amazing job. And there's so many different levels to this movie that I definitely could go into for a whole hour. But I just think it's a movie that was overlooked by a lot of people when it came out. And I think it will stand the test of time, just especially in Ridley's filmography, and maybe this old and this late into his career, just throw another masterpiece out like this. I was just floored by it. Seen it several times since release, and it just gets more interesting every time. So Regina Hall, I'm the person who saw it. There's a lot of us out there, and screw you for knocking this film in front of the small audience at the Oscars.
Anyway. When that moment happened, I thought of you immediately. I can't believe we didn't text about this.
I was so mad. I couldn't. I was like, how dare she? Mad
too.
Yeah. Like, if you're going to make a joke like that, which, look, I'm fine with roasting films at the Oscars. Sometimes pick some, throwaway trash, I don't say trash film, but like some blockbuster popcorn thing that that no one saw. Right. Yeah. Don't go after a film that is a lot of people love, that is by one of the best filmmakers we have. Right. It seemed like kicking it when it's down. They made this film to get recognized. This wasn't Space Jam 2. You know what I mean? Knock that if you want. Don't go after this. Anyway.
Exactly.
I'm not talking about the Oscars anymore, but I love this film on almost every level.
I'm with you. I mean, honestly, this would have been on my list. I didn't put it because I knew you would have it. But I love this movie. We talked about this movie, I think, for about 2 hours after we watched it.
Yeah.
How complex and amazing it is in all its pursuits. It's a shame. And again, this goes to one of our larger themes that it's hard to make a movie like this, but when a movie like this does get made, I think the media noise and everything that surrounds it is just so deafening that it sort of is even hard for a movie of all this pedigree and such to sort of stand up. And then secondly, you add to that other point of kind of casual, passive viewing, where you combine those two forces at play. Majority of people have already made up their mind. Oh, sword and sandal, women's story, 3 times, told by men. This must be garbage. Why are we even doing this? And that's sort of it. The end of it. Have you even seen the movie?
Right.
I bet most people who have had all their hot takes about this movie haven't even watched it, which is the saddest part.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. Yeah, that's why I see movies I know I'm not going to like, just so I can, criticize them later. I think that was just the twist of the knife at the Oscars. I mean, this should have been nominated for performance, for screenplay, for score. I'm one of my favorite scores of last year. And instead you get Regina Hall making some joke about how no one saw it.
Absolutely. Secondly, no dig on her, and I hate to bring it back to the Oscars again, but
I know.
She seems really nice, and whatever I've seen her, and she's
funny. Yeah, no, she's funny.
But at the same time, what an odd group of 3 people hosting this. Why are you even in it? Very bizarre to me.
No, the hosts, I think, were irrelevant in a way is a win, because usually the hosts kind of bomb and can bring the show down. I feel like the 3 hosts sort of added nothing, but also took nothing away. And they were sort of just like non. I think all 3 of them are great. Some of my favorite female comedians, actually, all 3 of them. But
except Hall is not a comedian. That's my point.
Sorry? Well, she's a comedic actress. You're right. She's not a stand-up like Wanda or Amy Schumer, but she's been in comedies for a long time. I find her really funny, but not that joke funny. Though in a way it is funny that Ridley Scott there's 2 Ridley Scott jokes last Duel, and then Chris Rock's funny joke about G.I. Jane 2 that got him hit in the face. So Ridley Scott, even though he wasn't there, he's still making an impact. Right. So yeah, but that was and any closing thoughts on 2021 or the Oscars?
Well, I'll just say that I think doing this episode was a little bit therapeutic for me, because as you can tell, I clearly was rattled by a lot of this. So
yeah,
deep breath. I
Yeah.
feel a lot better. And, you know, the movies and the art of storytelling and what it takes to do this, like that's a thing like this cannot knock that, you know, the
Right.
relevance and importance of that is still going to live on. And hopefully we as a culture, the academy, the award producers, everybody learns something good from this, you know, and moves on. And the last thing I would say is that the people who should be held accountable are in some way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no. I think for me, like I look at the future as long as the movies are being made that are good, the Oscars can do whatever they want and even fade into irrelevancy. Like what I care about more is the art of film, and that there are great filmmakers out there making great movies. That as much as I've loved, and we've just talked about in the last episode, how much of an Oscars and the whole horse race and everything about it has been such a big part of my life and my life as a movie fan for so long. If that went away, I'm still showing up to every like Paul Thomas Anderson movie or every Ridley Scott movie. And I still will love movies, regardless of what the Oscars does. I don't know if I'll go to see the next Will Smith movie though, but he's in the doghouse. Yeah. I still can't believe that. It's still rattling, but you're right. This has been a little therapeutic, and hopefully therapeutic for our listeners too. And that we're not, it's been a pleasant surprise dropping into your feed a week in an off week instead of an annoyance. let's hope that.
All right. Well, thank you all for listening. And as always, we appreciate your support. So please subscribe, rate us, review us, and let us know how we're doing.
Yeah. And I think every once in a while we'll kind of pop in with these bonus episodes. I had a good time. I think this was fun. Just talk about something a little bit out of the confines of the actual format of the show. So yeah, every once in a while you might see us pop in a bit early, and don't forget to come back next week, and we'll have our episode around comedy and humor. So get ready to laugh next week. No more depressing Oscar talk. We're back to something a little lighter. So yeah, it was a good discussion, Karan.
Likewise.
Cool.
Bye.
Bye.